How you doing today, Brian?
Hey, Nick, I'm good. I'm actually thankful that, this is the first August in years that I don't have to be sitting down and planning for IT budgetary season, going into end of third quarter and end of fourth quarter prior to getting budget approvals. But I know that that's not true for everyone.
Yeah, no, that's some people budgeting season's easy, especially if you're a smaller organization, right? You just buy things when you need them, and you don't necessarily have a budgeting season. But it's definitely a different kind of August, right? For everybody. And today we had good conversation. We went everything from how does your IT support staff handle, people working from home, all the way to leadership, things that you should be thinking about with a remote work staff.
And some of that is inclusive of really reviewing some of the policies and procedures that you've had in place and forecasting into what we both sort of cringe at calling the quote unquote new normal. But it is a term that continues to get thrown out there. So we do touch on that quite a bit today, as well as offering up some leadership tips and tricks about how to consider hitting refresh on some of what you may have had in place, as well as planning for what may not be a typical procurement cycle for a lot of folks that are going into budget planning for 2021.
Yeah, I guess with that, let's let people get on with the show.
All right. Thanks for joining us for another edition of Lead.exe. I'm Brian Comerford in Denver, Colorado.
And I'm Nick Lozano in Washington, D.C.
And today you've got just the two of us. We're going to be chatting a little bit about what tech nerds like us love to nerd out about, which is technology and, in part, what technology leaders are going to be challenged with, particularly in budgeting for the new normal, sort of all the things that come along with what we're quote unquote calling the new normal post-COVID crisis.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know about you, but I'm kind of tired of hearing about this new normal. These past few months have kind of felt like Groundhog Day. I wake up at times and I don't really know what day it is. The only way I can differentiate a weekday from a weekend day is either I work my day job or I don't. but as you're saying, it's a very challenging time right now, and I think especially for IT leaders, right? We've seen this transition where a lot of businesses are core, their employees are in an office location or remote location, or satellite office. Internet is supplied to them, IT staff is there, everything they need on hand, supplies. And now instantly, a lot of their staff are dispersed. They're at home. They're using home computers on home networks. And like you and I were discussing before we hit record, there's these demands on the home internet that weren't there before.
Right.
So a lot of people have their kids at home and their other spouses, and your other spouse might be working from home or watching Netflix while you're trying to upload a 3 gig file so that your marketing team can see stuff. So it's really putting a strain on IT support teams. Is where do they draw this line of how much to support, and where do you draw that line between something's a personal problem and something's like a business problem? Because I feel like it's a really gray area, right? If somebody can't work, I feel like as an IT support technician, you're kind of obligated to help them to get them going, right? You got to at least get them to some level of productivity. But at a certain point, I feel like when it's home internet and different things like that, it's difficult to draw that line, right?
Part of the recommendation that I've been working with a couple different organizations on addresses exactly that point, Nick. And for me, it starts with putting together a playbook of best practices. And so starting with, how are you sizing what type of bandwidth you as a consumer currently have in place at home? Because to address exactly the constraints that you're talking about, if you've got, you may even have more than one machine, right? You may have your work machine, and then you may have a personal computer at home, and you're using them for different things simultaneously throughout the day. And then you've got other people who are gaming, you may have guests, you may have, spouse. I mean, all of those things that are putting a bandwidth constraint on what typically would not be a normal load environment for what your consumer, bandwidth requirements were previously. So even just starting with something like that, what is the recommendation? And it can be in the form of a simple form that you can prop up really quickly so that you can gather some of the information for each of your folks who are currently constrained with working at home. And particularly if it's going to be, back to your favorite phrase, the new normal, and you're going from a work from home situation, which, prior to the COVID crisis for most companies was more of a temporary situation. Now it's becoming more of a permanent temporary kind of situation, where the inverse of what, the prior experience was for workers, where you may work from home one day a week. Well, now you may go into the office one day a week, right? And some people may not be returning to the office at all. If there's one thing about the crisis, it's that suddenly we had a clear production experiment in what working from home looked like, right?
Yeah, and I think it's this crazy paradigm shift, right? And I feel like as we've gone through time, remember a few months ago, that was probably like back in December, I saw that guy on LinkedIn just post this absolutely crazy thing about remote work, right? His comment about it's like created by millennials, to waste time. And here we are now, we're just living in the remote work, in general right now. Most people who have the ability to work from home are pretty much working from home. And I think you hit, some key points there. Some of it's like having a standard operating procedure for your staff, right? Saying when you get to X, Y, Z level, this is where we need to stop. And some of it's education too, right? 100 megabyte circuit up and down is expensive in an enterprise environment when that's guaranteed bandwidth. You might tell a home user, we have 100 up, 100 down at the office. And they're like, well, I have FiOS. It's a gig up and a gig down. And you're like, oh, that's not the same thing.
Right.
Those speeds aren't guaranteed to you. They're just telling you that you can get up to that speed. But with everybody home right now, I mean, I have FiOS in my personal home right now, and it's nowhere close to that. It's maybe half that speed right now, which is still pretty good, but it still has jitter and everything. It's not as clean as internet as sitting in your office with an enterprise guaranteed SLAs for a certain level of service. So some of that I feel like goes back to education and end user education, and educating them on things that they never needed to know about before. And some people might have gone down the Wikipedia, Google rabbit hole and become experts in network technologies.
That's right, as well as enterprise storage and security. Yeah. Well, and I think back to the sort of that checklist approach, right? The standard operating procedure for a work computer looks different than if you're trying to instruct an end user how to configure their home-based PC to be able to securely connect to your network. If you've got VPN that they're required to be using, making sure that their antivirus is up to date, making sure that their OS is actually up to date. All of these things that
you mean you don't support Windows XP anymore?
It's unlikely, yes, but I do still know some people running Windows 7. Why? I don't know, but it happens. And that's kind of the point, right? That you've got to have a baseline for where you expect people to be operating from. And configuring home workstations, I mean, that's a real issue. I've worked with a number of companies that prior to the pandemic and the lockdown orders felt like they were pretty well prepared for work from home. But what they quickly discovered was they actually did not have VPN allowance for their entire workforce. They could maybe have up to 100 simultaneous users off-site who are connecting in via VPN. Well, if you've got a 400-person organization and everyone is simultaneously trying to get into your network, now you've got a sizing issue that you need to address. And a lot of those same companies ran into an issue where they did not have proper hardware available. So lots of desktop users in the office, well, they had loaner laptops, but again, you're not expecting everyone in your workforce to depart at the same time.
Yeah, and it's just compounding some of the traditional IT management stuff, right? you're shipping things in, shipping stuff back out, and things you had before that were hot swaps probably aren't surviving because they're going back and forth. And we all know no matter which parcel carrier you use, they're not exactly gentle with all the packages. So I mean, it's just increasing it tenfold, right? And it's a good opportunity for IT leaders to go back through and look at their operating procedures just for everything, right? Do we have documentation on how to get to the VPN to free up some of your support staff's time? Are you using a ticketing system like Zendesk or something like that? Do you have wikis that your folks can get into without having to be logged in? Um, it's going back and looking at it from an end user and saying, okay, well, if I can't get into work today or I need to do X, Y, Z, how do I know to do that if I can't get in any of my work stuff? And you also brought up a good point too with the shift of people planned partially for half their staff but not all their
Mhm.
staff. And this was a good test, right? Because it's always hard to actually produce real world conditions and stuff in a testing environment when you say, okay, everybody's going to work from home, but you don't necessarily know what that's going to look like. I always say that end users are going to do what end users do. They always do something that surprises you. It's not that it's bad that they're doing, it's just that they do things different ways that you probably don't think about doing it because you're an IT professional. Like you have everybody loaded up on a VPN, and then what if you have, a few folks who are working on digital assets, maybe like a movie or something like that, passing it back and forth through the VPN?
Right.
Um, that can just bring your VPN to a crawling halt if your hardware is not good enough to handle all that tunnel back to the office and then the back and forth of a 3 or 4 gig file.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, those are things where I think being able to prop up a form to help gather information if you don't know exactly what every role in your company may currently require based on what they're doing, they may have radically different needs. And so while some folks may be perfectly fine with whatever their home internet provider is currently allowing them in terms of bandwidth, there may be completely other user types who are seriously being constrained with their jobs because of challenges that they've got. And so you've got to be creative and providing some additional workarounds, whether it's setting up some kind of enterprise, you know, whether it's a Dropbox or some kind of enterprise storage that's online that makes it easier to transfer files versus just trying to push everything, as a single deliverable versus via an upload. Gathering that information, I think, is one of the challenges, especially for larger organizations where you've got very disparate roles, and then everyone simultaneously trying to have the same kind of virtual work style.
Exactly. You sent everybody home and they denial of service distributed your network. And it's not because they're trying to do a DDoS. That's just what's happening because everybody's remote and everybody's trying to work from home, and your resources just can't handle it. Because what IT staff would really plan for that? When you think about it, right? Most people aren't thinking, "Hey, everybody's going to be home. It's going to be a long-term thing." Our business continuity and disaster recovery is normally like a disaster. Like, hey, there's
Right.
been an earthquake and we can't get into the office for like a month. It's not this, going on 5 month, thing of people working from home. So it's really forced IT leaders to shift their thinking and how they plan their resources. And it should be interesting times coming up budgeting. I bet the hardware players like Cisco and Juniper are going to be selling massive amounts of hardware. Them
Mm-hmm.
and F5 and everything, and AWS, and what Azure has a virtual desktop too. I bet those things are going to be slammed, right? Because people are like, well, here's where we are now, here's where we need to go, and this is how we can get there the fastest. So it's definitely probably an interesting time to be an IT leader because you have leeway to spend money and justify things that probably took 3 or 4 discussions and board level meetings to get approval for. And now it's just hitting the CFO and the CEO, and they're saying, just buy it and we'll justify it. And the board's like, well, fine, we get it. Everybody's working from home. You need this. So it's definitely interesting. Hardware, security, everything. I feel like the vendors are just going to be coming out of this thing golden.
Well, I'll tell you what, 2020 has been the year for me moving from leadership and IT operations into providing software on the vendor side. And so much of what my current employer provides is exactly that. It's remote access technologies, and it's been unbelievable how busy this time has been. So certainly, from a procurement standpoint, I think the other thing to be very mindful of is with the budgetary season, what has been, the old normal has been, the month of August rolls around, you start having initial conversations about what are the initiatives on deck for the next year. And let's start discussing, what are some of the functional areas within the business that may have their own unique needs, and let's start asking questions so that we can put together RFPs, so that we can start developing purchase lists. It may look a little different going into 2021 if for no other reason, part of what you pointed out, a lot of those hardware providers in particular are going to be slammed. I don't know about you, but
Yeah.
I was looking for a new headset recently, and
They're still
finding
like impossible to get. Them
well,
and webcams. Yeah, you
and
just can't get them.
I mean, these things are like Lysol wipes or something, right? I mean, they're just, if you can find it, it's like you're buying gold.
Yeah. Well, let me tell you, you can find the cheap webcams, cheap headsets, but those are the things that aren't going to work that well. Trying to
Mm-hmm.
find something like reputable, I'm not going to say brand names here, but trying to find something reputable that works, that's where the expensive factor comes in, right? Because the supply's low because everybody's just looking for it to work from home still.
For sure. And having overseen IT procurement for so many years, these things, in a normal cycle, you would just be able to put out your budgetary number, get some quotes on what things are going to cost, and then go through the approval process. Right now, that may have to happen in very different stages. In fact, some of the approvals may need to come much earlier prior to when the typical annual budget would be approved,
Mm-hmm.
right? So if you're trying to get 300 new laptops for your workforce, chances are you're not going to be able to get that all in one single, volume purchase. You may need to go to the table negotiating with your hardware provider to say, look, over the next 18 months, we're going to need these 300, and we still want the volume discount because we'd buy them all today if we could.
You just don't have them.
So,
Yeah.
help us out here. What can we do on sort of a, either a delayed delivery cycle or adding some additional discounts for, for getting those things iteratively versus all in one fell swoop.
Yeah, and I think as we're talking about budgeting in 2021, I think we're going to see this shift of some organizations deciding, hey, let's reduce our office footprint, right? Commercial
Mm-hmm.
real estate is expensive.
Right.
It's expensive before you even build anything into it.
Mm-hmm.
So I think we're going to see some organizations kind of go the way the big consulting world's been for a number of years, is that they get a typical space. You're going to see maybe like some accountants there, maybe some essential IT staff, some janitorial staff, some operation folks who need to be there just to make things run. And then everything else is just going to be hoteling.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody's going to have an office. You'll get a stipend probably to, fix up your own desk, buy some things that you think you need. Maybe if you need a new router or something, your stipend will cover that. I think we're going to see a lot of that coming within the next year, just as, you said it's difficult to plan to procure things. And especially when everybody's at home, that procurement, that idea of what you need is completely different for every employee. All your IT folks who do IT for a living probably already had a decent router and a home network set up and personal computers. If their work computer dies, they know how to do that stuff. But, the everyday end user might not be set up that way. So maybe they need the stipend to just go out and buy a new, wireless router that's not 15 years old or that's not from, your ISP.
Right.
So I think we'll see a big transition to employers probably shifting some of that budgetary cost, not renewing office space leases, and shifting some of that money outwards to their employees to kind of buy whatever they feel like they need in their office without going through all this purchase requisition thing of, hey, I need a chair. It's like, well, here, here's X dollars. You can do whatever you want with X dollars.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, and I know what you're saying is already true. I was just talking to a company this morning that is, as of today, actually moving offices, and it was not the move that they anticipated. They had originally planned to expand out another floor in the building that they're currently in, and they had all the contracts drawn up. They had everything ready to go. What they determined after looking at expenses was that it was actually going to be cheaper for them to pay a penalty to cancel all the contracts that were in place and to reverse course and to go actually get a new office in a completely new building that is less than half the size of what the current office is that they were planning on expanding, right? They were planning on doubling the amount of office space that they had. Now they're going the other direction and they're reducing their current office space by half. And even with the penalties, they've been able to calculate that that's actually going to be more cost effective for them, and shift everything over so that they do have permanent work from home status for the majority of their workforce, with only the administrative staff in the headquarters, and then hoteling set up for anyone else that needs to come in, and meeting rooms for entertaining clients or, board meetings or whatever.
Or entertaining yourself.
Well, you can do that at home.
Yeah. And that's one of the things that has shifted, with this. I feel like more people hop on a Zoom or a WebEx or a Teams or GoToMeeting or whatever video platform you are. And before all this happened, like you'd hop on, I'd turn on my video and I'd be the only one with video on. But now it's like people are just, used to doing it and they're having fun and they find different backgrounds. You see the backgrounds that people do. So I think it has opened people up more into this video kind of teleworking thing. But I guess since we've talked a lot about probably like just the logistical aspects of this, but what do you think some of the, leadership challenges of this are going to be?
Well, you just touched on one of them, I think. So, the stigma of being on video has effectively disappeared with the ubiquity of everyone being on video calls, for their team engagement. Part of what I've noticed is all of a sudden you start to see that behavior cracking around the edges a little bit. You hear somebody's laundry buzzer go off in the background and they disappear from being on camera and then they never return for the remainder of the meeting, right? So, part of, from a leadership perspective, I think part of what is important is establishing what those working agreements are up front. And if you haven't been through a working agreements exercise with your team or teams previously, I think it's valuable for a lot of reasons. One, it's not just about the etiquette of interaction. It's also about setting expectations, right? What do you expect your workforce to do to prove a certain level of engagement? And right now I've heard from a lot of leaders that productivity has been something that it's been more difficult to measure. Some folks, their work style is they just don't disengage. And so there may be folks on your team who you have to remind, hey, when you take a lunch break, get up from your desk and move away from the computer and go sit outside and eat your lunch, or take a break, do something to end your screen time, because a lot of folks are just wired where hey, I'm working from home, I'm here with all my stuff, I can have lunch right here and just keep powering through. And so that becomes unhealthy at a certain level, just as much as the inverse is true, where you've got folks that it's hard to tell, are you actually how much are you actually working? And so being able to establish those working agreements and be very clear on what expectations are, to me, it's one of those things that it is especially helpful if you're having a team meeting and you've got 10 people on the call and you see that 5 of them have their cameras on, they're listening, they're nodding, they're engaging, they're participating in the conversation. And then you've got 5 with their cameras off and you're not really sure what's going on. And, you know, so again, to me, a simple solution for that from a leadership perspective is just establish what the expectations are. Hey, unless you're having, a personal issue and you know, need to take a day where you're saying, I'm off camera today, and kind of establish that up front. The rule is when we're having a meeting, we all turn on our cameras. I just want to know that we're interacting at the same level that we would if we were sitting around a table together.
Yeah, like that. And I feel like there's a balance there, right? Um, as we see over time, people are getting this Zoom fatigue. I know there was a point in the beginning I was on so many like just video meetings and video meetings. I'm like, if I have another video meeting, I'm gonna smack my head into the computer. And it's, there needs to be a balance, right? Maybe it's like figuring out what works for your team and saying, hey, every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, we get on the video on these team meetings. Any other day on a meeting, you're free to, you know, do your laundry while you're on this call or something like that. Because we all know everybody's working from home, and some people have
Sure.
children at home, and maybe they're shutting the video off because their kids are running around causing terror in the background or something. I don't. I'm just making something up, but I mean, we all know that stuff like that happens. Um, so I think maybe some of it's like you said, it's the work agreements and the clear expectations, so that they know what you're expecting of them, and the expectations have been set out clearly, and then you just give them the trust initially right away, right? You trust but verify.
Yeah.
You trust them until they give you a reason to not trust them, and it goes back to what is productivity, right? I think there's going to be a shift in how we see productivity. Productivity is not necessarily coming to an office or being available from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. or whatever your hours are. Productivity is going to shift to more about, are you being productive? Are things getting done? Instead of looking at people's Skype status, their Skype for work or their Slack and seeing how long they've been offline.
That's right.
Um, you know, those things are there. You can manage people that way if you want to, but if you just don't trust them initially to get their work done, then you're just setting up a rocky road, to go ahead. I don't think micromanaging works in person, and it doesn't work remotely. So it's why you just trust but verify. Don't worry about if that Skype icon goes to inactive for 45 minutes. Maybe they got up, went for a walk around the block, and took their kid out for a bike ride because they just couldn't handle being inside anymore. So I think we're going to have to see a lot more flexibility and a lot more, um, different ways you see productivity. Productivity is not necessarily sitting in front of a computer for 8 hours a day or at your desk. People have found ways to waste time at work.
Oh yeah.
In an office, and at past employers, past places, I have seen how people do that, and I'm sure you have over the years. I mean, like it could be somebody who's totally in the office, and you shut their computer down, and you go to wipe everything and reconfigure it, and you're like, oh, this person was a very busy individual. But back to my original statement, because I digress, is that we're going to see productivity is going to be a different way, and you have to be a little bit less hands-on and more clear with your expectations and trusting your people, and then just verifying that's what they're doing. Trust them until they give you a reason not to trust them.
Well, that's certainly my philosophy. And hearing you say that, Nick, makes me realize that it's probably a more egalitarian approach than maybe some cultures will support. And, so I think it depends on what is the performance management style and expectations for your type of organization. Certainly private companies versus public companies versus private equity backed companies may all have different standards that they enforce for a variety of reasons. And so from a leadership perspective, I think it's important to know what is required and where is there the room for flexibility so that you can work with your team to create those definitions. Something else that you touched on just in terms of productivity, a lot of companies and a lot of other leaders that I've worked with have their own performance indicators, right? So how do you measure the work that's actually getting done? What are those expectations? And, does it have to be with, so many touch points with clients during the workday or during the month or the week or whatever it is? And so there may be a need to go through and readdress those. The Zoom fatigue, I think in part has come from the fact that there's been a lot of worried employers who feel like they need to keep their workers engaged with them during every minute of the workday. Otherwise, they might go off and do something that's other than work. Right? And so it's like all of a sudden the volume of Zoom meetings that you see on your calendar increases. And I'm not confident that they necessarily mean you're being more productive or more engaged as a result of it. In fact, in some, it's like, wow, this is really interfering with me getting some things done as a result, right?
Exactly. And I look at Zoom meetings the way I look at any meeting, or a video meeting the way I look at any meeting. A meeting with 4 people in it, that's 1 hour, is not a 1 hour meeting. It's a 4 hour meeting, because you're taking away 4 hours of productivity.
That's right.
So anytime you go to schedule anything, stop and think how many people are going to put in it, and if the meeting's really worth that time. One of the things I know that works well with remote work, because I've done it before in a previous role, is actually just writing, right? Having a good project management system, even if you're just writing notes in a OneNote or a Basecamp or something like that, clear written communication where people can pick up the parts at any point in time and read through everything. Slack's great for messaging and Teams and email, but a lot of times people on projects are left out of conversation. Things will get decided in an IM message or a text message. And with so many different ways to communicate now, they don't realize that other team members haven't seen that. So I think it's important, to also lean on written, long form communication, and limiting the meetings just to when decisions need to be made. Obviously, you probably still need your reconnection time to just do your stand up, say, hey, what's going on? What are you working on? What are your barriers? What can I help you with? You should probably still have those, but I think, this remote time and remote working, long written form communication should be kind of your gold standard and your go-to first before the meetings and the video conferences and everything.
I think that's a great rule of thumb, Nick. I would add to that for organizations that have not yet settled on some type of collaborative technology to help drive their team engagement, whether it's Basecamp, whether it's Slack, Microsoft Teams, there's a lot of very analogous tools out there that allow you to do just that, set up channels specific to your teams, to a project, however you're designating it. And then it gives you a centralization point where it's easy to tag individuals. It's easy to tag every member of the team, keep awareness engaged through those notifications, be able to centralize information in an iterative type of knowledge base or wiki and, or notebook or whatever the format is, so that you can continue to work in a highly engaged collaborative type of format where you don't necessarily have to be sitting right across the desk from somebody else that you would normally just, lean over your cube wall and ask a question. Now it may be getting addressed through IM or through a shared channel chat.
Yeah. And, collaboration's great too. And one of the things that with the Skype for Business, which is going away, but Teams, any of those IM things, or text messages, it's that feel that, people feel like they need to reply to things instantly, right? or they need people to reply to them instantly because they're sending them an instant message. I would still say, at least for me, relaxing the IM culture, because it can burn you out, right? Don't send someone an IM and expect them to reply within seconds. Just like I wouldn't send an email to somebody and then turn around 30 seconds later, if we were in the office, say, hey, Brian, did you get my email? Why didn't you open that? People are at home, they're on conference calls, they're probably working. And that's where the long written form communication comes in handy, because you can just write a very long explanation and tag somebody. Like you said, if it's like a Teams or Slack and it's in a channel, then everybody can see it and you just wait for them to reply. Don't expect instantaneous communication all the time, because as we lean more to this work-life integration, and not this work-life balance, because right now we're home and our work is the same thing, people aren't taking that break, right? Because it's just so easy to forget that you're still working. And right now there's not a ton of places to go. There's not a ton of things to do. So it's really easy to just sit and do work for 12, 13 hours a day because, you can only watch so much Netflix. um, and I think, realizing that the instant communication is good, but it also doesn't need to be instant. It doesn't need to be real time. Let people have a break and allow them times to collect their thoughts.
And again, using something as simple as working agreements that are clearly established that set those expectations. And when I talk about working agreements, I'm not talking about writing, an essay about what these things mean. You can have a bulleted list. I've seen working agreements in a team as short as 3 bulleted items and as long as, 2 PowerPoint slides
Hmm.
that kind of cover all of these different things. And that can range from, speak openly and honestly, right? Treat this as a safe and open environment for sharing ideas before your other teammates, right? I mean, things that are more EQ oriented like that for interpersonal interaction. But then they can also identify things like respond to all work related emails within 48 hours, respond to all IM posts within 8 hours,
Hmm.
whatever those things are that you feel are those important expectations to set around the corporate communications in particular. um, just spending some time going through that. And again, if you've already established working agreements, just like looking at your budgetary cycle, those things may need to be revised, right? And particularly as we're looking at what has changed and what's going to continue to change, as folks may be returning to work, they may already be back in the office, but they're operating under some of these prior established guidelines or rules. That's a good time to say, hey, let's take a look at how we've done everything and start the revision process.
Yeah, I think you've hit it really on the head there. It's effective communication, right? We're just talking about communicating with your staff and your expectations, especially with the fall schools getting ready to start. For a lot of people and in a lot of jurisdictions, it's still up in the air whether the kids are going back to school or if they're doing some school in person, some at home. So I think you said it's a good time for everything just to be reviewed, and take the worst case scenario and plan from there, right? You've already had the worst case scenario, so what would you do differently? What do you expect out of your people? Like you said, working agreements is a simple one, and it could be just as simple as, hey, every Monday through Friday from 11 p.m. to 3 p.m., you must be online and available. Any other time, I don't care when you're here or not. It could be as simple as that. Uh, but yeah, like you said, Brian, I think communication is key right now.
Well, and Nick, I know when we typically have a guest on the show, we love to talk about books or media resources. What are some of those things that can help inform? And I thought it would be worthwhile to point out some of the work that one of our prior guests, Dr. Gleb Tsipursky, has done. I know that on his website, which is disasteravoidanceexperts.com, that he has published, a freely accessible article called Adapt and Plan for the New Abnormal of the COVID-19 Pandemic. And in it, there are a lot of these same types of tips and tricks that he addresses, that really, help address, up front, some of the communication challenges, some of the revision types of approaches that can be taken. So out of the number of books that he's written, I think that's one that could be worth pointing out right now. He's the guy's a brainiac, and he's chock full of good advice. So I thought that would be one that I felt was worth sharing for today's episode.
Helps if I unmute, right? I would say even his podcast episode 27, when we had him on, is a good one. He goes over a lot of that. The odd thing is we recorded that, like 3 days into most of the
Lockdown,
organization.
yeah.
It was really weird, but it's full of great content, full of great insights. So I would definitely recommend our listeners to go check that out and check out his content in general. The other two that I would add is from the founders of Basecamp. That's Remote and Rework.
Yeah.
Um, they have been a remote company. I think what's Basecamp, like 15 years old,
Yeah.
something like
Oh
that.
yeah.
They've been mostly a remote organization for that whole time, and they share their thoughts and ideas based on what's worked for them, what doesn't work for them, and it's a really quick, easy reads. Both those books are probably only like 200 pages each book.
Oh yeah.
You can easily
With
get through them in a
pictures.
weekend. Yeah, in a weekend you can easily get through them. Or if you listen to audiobooks like me, you can put it up to 1.5 speed, and you can listen to it in like a couple hours.
It's true. I think I breezed through Rework in about a couple lunch breaks.
Yeah. So I mean, it's great content. It's just straight to the point. What's worked for them, what they found, what didn't work. Is it a gospel? Is everything in there? Say, is it going to true? Is it work for you? Who knows, right? Everything's different for every person, every organization, but it's full of lots of different ideas on how to approach remote working.
Well, part of what I like about you recommending both of those titles, and I agree, is that they are structured in more of a playbook kind of format, right? It's not intended to give you the rules for every organization, but it gives you a lot of ideas about how to rethink some of those things that may have been part of your environment or part of your work style previously, and equips you with, I think, a critical mindset to be able to question, are those things actually of value to what we're currently doing? Or, are there opportunities for us to lean out some of our processes?
No, and you're right. It's a great opportunity to just look at everything right now, and like you said, with the work agreements, and leaders should be going back there and just looking through everything, and look at resources, talk to other people in different industries. Right, that's what I always tell people: is talk to somebody else in a different industry completely from yours, and get a different perspective of how something is working and how something is not. You might find something that somebody is doing in banking, and maybe you're a software consulting company that works for them, that might work for you. So go ahead and talk to different people. There's tons of groups and ideas and people on LinkedIn. There's tons of places you can go. I know a bunch of people are doing like meetups over Zoom and everything like that, I've seen. So the resources are out there. You just got to look for them.
And it may be healthy to break away from some screen time and actually pick up a book.
What's that?
Well, with that, thanks for the conversation today, Nick. I hope this is beneficial to other leaders who are wrestling not only with their technical challenges, but also just how to address the evolving landscape of the workplace.
Yeah, with that, all right. Thanks, Brian.
Thanks, Nick.